Greetings, everyone. My name is Kali Akuno, representing Cooperation Jackson and the Institute for Social Ecology for this race and ecology series that we've been doing now for almost 2 years. I'm happy to present to you today part 2 of our series about the Sudan and what we've been describing as the ongoing kind of counter-revolution that has been taking place there following the revolution that occurred beginning in 2018, 2019, which didn't get, in my view, a sufficient level of either coverage or support from forces in the United States, for a lot of obvious reasons regarding how the United States government wants to keep us all isolated, misinformed. But we, those of us who consider ourselves creatures of the left, have a responsibility to study, to probe, and to make connections when and where we can. So I've been trying to do as much as possible to bring, some ongoing information and analysis and some aspects of what we all can do to act in solidarity with the Sudan, because it's much more, I would argue, it's much more critical and vital to the overall world situation than many kind of give it credit for or put in their analysis. So for part 2, I wanted to bring on someone who I'm just really getting the pleasure of meeting. We are both part of the Transnational Institute's kind of fellowship program. I was pleased and honored to learn a tremendous amount from a presentation that they did on a TNI call. And then as I was organizing, other comrades that I've known for work for many years, her name kept coming up. So I want to introduce everybody to Muzan to give us an analysis of how the revolution was organized, from the ground level. Many of us, many in the audience, particularly ISE, have studied Rojava for many years, and there's a lot of analysis around that, much less so around what took place in the Sudan. And I think there's just as much to learn from that experience as there is any of the Zapatistas, anything we can study in the recent memory. So I really wanted to just turn it over in many respects so that we could all just learn. There were a series of questions that we prepared, and Muzan has definitely dug in terms of an organizing analysis that I want to just basically turn over to you, Muzan, so we can get into it.
Yeah, thank you, Kali, and thanks to the Institute and to your audience for making time for this conversation. I hope we manage to bring something that is useful to advancing the global revolutionary political project.
Yeah, so one of the first things that just get it rolling and turn it over to you, Muzan. Some of the questions, we'll start with the first question that we kind of reorganized. Let me pull that up. I've been trying to pull all this stuff together with the little distractions that we've had. But what were the resistance committees? Where did they come from? And how and why did they emerge? That's the first fundamental question really wanted to start with, and just to hand over to you to give us an analysis and a breakdown.
Sure. So the full name of the resistance committees is the Neighborhood Resistance Committees. And the name itself tells us a lot, first of all. So we know that it's neighborhood-based. It's a neighborhood resistance committees, that it's a group of individuals, being this committee, who are brought together by their shared interest and commitment to resist an existing situation. So the creation of the existing neighborhood resistance committees, that one started in 2019. And before we detail it, it's important to know that there were many previous attempts, like in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, around 2012, many attempts to build such political bodies. And that can be attributed to like Sudan's modern history, where we had the first popular revolution in 1964. That was like 6 years after the independence. And in this revolution, protests and grassroots bodies pushed for the ousting of the military president. So the idea of grassroots organizations achieving regime change is one that is easily imaginable, for the Sudanese public. And it is repeated in the Sudanese political discourse. Also, having a long history of dictatorships, it's not a surprise that such an idea was attempted a number of times by a number of individuals or political parties and organizations. However, none of these previous attempts reached the level of success, like not even close to the RCs, the resistance committees that were created in 2019 and afterwards. So this latest attempt came with the protests that started in late 2018 and continued throughout 2019 and was known as the December 2018 revolution. So Sudan in 2018 was suffering serious dire economic conditions, severe unemployment, inflation was over 60%, causing seriously accelerating impoverishment of the population. And like many times before, the answer of the government to such a situation was to reduce spending on social services, to sell public assets, or like a mix of both those things. Bashir government was in power for 30 years at the time. So in order to reduce spending, the government decided one of the things was to remove subsidies for bread. And overnight, the cost of bread doubled. We had high school students in the city of Adbara, when faced with the doubling of the price of the sandwich that they purchased for breakfast every morning, they started protesting. And like the story goes that the restaurant owner, responding to their anger, just told them, "It's not me who increased it. Go take it with the government." And they did. They just went out to the streets and took it with the government. And the entire country being already angry at the economic situation, their protests found a lot of support in other cities. And protests started in different cities and different areas across the country. During this time, a new labor organization has already announced itself. It was called the Sudanese Professionals Association, the SPA. And it was formed of a number of parallel labor unions. So we had already the official labor unions, they were controlled by the government. So those were the opposition labor unions, parallel labor unions. They included lawyers, teachers, doctors, engineers, pharmacists, and we notice here that they are all like white collar unions, and that is important to remember in terms of their interests and where their politics take them. So the SPA has announced itself a few months prior to December 2018. It issued some memorandum regarding the cost of living and demanded an increase in the minimum wage, and called for a protest on December 25th, 2018, to the parliament to demand the increase of minimum wage. Now, after that was before the protest started. After the protest started, the SPA announced that the demands of the streets are a full regime change. So we second that demand. They changed the final destination of their protest from the parliament to the presidential palace, and the demands were that by then to end the ruling of al-Bashir and his regime. And for weeks afterwards, the SPA kept announcing new routes to achieve reaching the palace, and the people showed up in larger numbers and were also faced by great oppression and violence from the state apparatus. And it was in this moment that the SPA called for the formation of the neighborhood resistance committees. The goal at that time was being able to have several protests simultaneously in different areas, like within the same city, and each were planned and managed by the resistance committee in the area, and thereby that will minimize the ability of the state tools of violence to suppress all these protests at the same time. And that tactic was successful. It managed to get more people to the protest. People felt safer. No, the police could not attack with the same level of violence all the protests and so on. And it continued in that way. The SPA would put out weekly timetable for protests, whether to the palace or the governmental building in the city or within neighborhoods themselves, and the RCs will plan and execute in their own areas. So the RCs differed from one area to the other. They took the characteristics of the residents of the area, regarding like their socioeconomic details and interests, and they were also mostly formed of young men, all of them. And it's understandable that the youth was the segment of the population that was most impacted by the unemployment and with the poverty, and they lacked any savings or assets to rely on. The future looked very bleak for this group. So they had the most interesting change in it. And also, since the social structure allowed men more freedom of movement and all of that, it was mostly men within these committees. And it's important to note that the majority of the protesters in the streets were women of all ages. However, it was like the requirements of attending meetings in certain way. The young men formed the committees to accommodate their way of living, meeting late at night in places that usually women are not welcome. So that was what led to a certain formation of those committees. During this time, the SPA also announced a charter, a political project, a political charter with more details. They had a list of demands, included like ending the military rule and instating a civilian government, and what the priorities of this government like even should be. And the charter was called the Charter of Freedom and Change. It was announced, pre-signed by four political coalitions, and opened for more signatures. But those four coalitions remained in power, remained in control of the FFC. They represented the classical opposition, parties, most of which have previously been part of the different Sudanese governments. And these coalitions included, the parties representing the agriculture and the commercial capital, who also were led by sectarian leaders, and also included the Sudanese Communist Party and a number of smaller parties on the left and the right, and a number of armed rebel movements as well. The public had very little trust in these parties, given their recent history of weakness and inefficiency, and sometimes betrayals of the public. But there was trust for this new thing called the SPA, the Sudanese Professional Association. The coalition became known as the Forces of Freedom and Change, FFC. And the protests continued, announced by the SPA, executed by the RC, and they increased in number and strength, and a new tactic was then introduced. That was the encampment, or the sittings surrounding the military headquarters that were demanding the ousting of al-Bashir and the end of a military rule. And the pressure of these sittings pushed the leaders of the government's tool of violence, that being like the army, the national security, the different paragovernmental militias, and so on. It pushed them to oust their president, al-Bashir, and announce themselves as a new government. And this was rejected by the public. The public were demanding 100% civilian. That was the main slogan at the time. But the military council, that's what they called themselves, they called for negotiations with the FFC. And that was the first parting between the FFC and the public and the RCs on the other side. It's of course not surprising. Like, the coalition of the FFC included, many parties that had an interest in sustaining the existing structure. They just wanted to be on top of it instead of al-Bashir. And the public that suffered from the economic condition and the lack of development and all of that, they wanted radical change. So tensions started to rise between the FFC and the RC, and the FFC was justifying their decisions to negotiate as being the only rational way to achieve goals of the revolution. The encampments were still ongoing, providing a space for political discussion and building strong, unified public opinion, and they continued for 2 months. During this time, there were also, there were a lot of calls for announcing the civilian government that were coming from the sittings. That's what people asked for, like, stop negotiations, just announce your civilian government. At this time, also, the military council has attacked the peaceful encampments a number of times. So the public opinion was to push for a general strike with the demand of ending the military rule immediately, that they didn't trust it. None of these demands had the full support of the FFC. It's not difficult to understand why. They were interested in maintaining the existing structure, and they benefited from that. And the majority of the population was not. So the public pressure has led to announcing a strike, and it was a massive success. Like this strike at the end of May of 2019 closed markets, companies, airlines, airports, seaports. The entire country was down in demand of the military rule, ending the military rule. And following this strike was a brutal attack of all the peaceful sittings and encampments in 14 cities around the country. The military council and their forces executed this brutal attack, killing over 100 peaceful protesters, like injuring and disappearing hundreds and thousands. And the attack was followed by a countrywide internet shutdown, announcing an end of all negotiations. The SPA, since they used social media basically to announce their like calls for protest and all of that, this forced a disconnect between the SPA and the RCs for the first time. And under this situation, the RCs were forced to take independent decisions. So they called for a countrywide protest against the military rule. And to plan for this protest, they had, they especially under internet shutdown, they had to do a lot of offline work, on the ground work, networking with neighboring RCs, and also to create direct links with their community. That's when we started seeing something called the coordination bodies on city level and on state level. And the aim was to plan this, like the largest protest in Sudan at the time. And the RCs remained independent in their decision making, each one of them, but they connected via coordination efforts, not effort to centralize the structure or the decision making. So this protest was a significant point in the evolution of the RCs, and there were other significant points as well. But the success of this protest, and it was huge, this also pushed the military council and the FFC back to negotiations. And then forming a transitional government that was in partnership, between the FFC and the military council. There was a lot of public rejection of any involvement of the military in political decision making, and that was how the RCs first, the RCs moved from the point of being just a tactic for protesting to an independent political actor. And the political positions of the RCs from there on were basically formed by a number of incidents and changes in the Sudanese political scene, similarly to this change to independent political thinking and decision making.
That's a lot. Thank you for breaking that down. It left me with more questions, even outside some of the ones that we prepared. But
okay,
let's stick with kind of what we had, because I know that's what you had lined up for, and go to the second one. Particularly in when you said they moved, they moved from a tactic to become their own political force.
Yeah.
Was that force really kind of grounded in a particular, was it just demands, or were there particular kind of ideological and political orientations that some of the various, RCs had, or was it just like you said, that was the character defined by the neighborhoods and the different kind of class interests of the neighborhoods?
Yeah. As we said, the RCs were first formed, of individuals who are united in their resistance to the existing regime. So those are, political organizations that are formed not on a specific political project, but against a specific political project, that's being the project of al-Bashir's regime. So therefore, their political ideology and their orientation, it kind of lacked clarity, but it was getting detailed and clarified by the actions. But by the actions of the power and the actions that they take as well in their response to it. That's whether the power was like the old regime or the military council or the transitional government or the coup government. They were always reacting to those political actors. But the thing that they maintained is that it was a high level of independence, even within committees themselves. So it's not a central decision that is made for all committees. And also they maintained a strong connection to their communities. So they had this compass that allowed them to evaluate the decisions they make according to their impact on these individuals who reside in the neighborhood, that they are the resistance committee of this neighborhood. It was a rather tangible, compass or guide. And at the same time, also remaining independent meant having hundreds and thousands of committees coming up with ideas and proposals all over, and then sending them through these coordination networks, which increased increase the area for discussion, and that's a kind of detailed the political ideas or project of the RCs, if we can say. Now, they had a very tense relationship with the existing parties, as we said. Most of these parties represented, national capital, whether agricultural or commercial. Many of them were previously involved with the regime in different ways. So they were all weak and inefficient. And there was also a public perception of these parties as betrayer, they betray the people. So that was the RC's perception as well, not just the public. But another important point is that following the formation of the transitional government, which was formed of the military council and the civilian half being the FFC, the FFC in this setup presented themselves as representatives of the revolution. So therefore, supporting the revolution meant supporting the FFC. And this created a tense relationship between the political parties and the RCs, because the RCs, they saw it important to protect the FFC to avoid a full takeover by the military. Like, we have now half the power, it's better than to lose full power to the military. But at the same time, the RCs also worked to make sure that the FFC and the entire government does not stray from the goals of the revolution. So they saw themselves as protectors of the goals of the revolution. And the goals of the revolution were then summed in the main chant of it, which is freedom, peace, and justice, with some focus on economic issues, because those were the issues that ignited the protest. And also there was a lot of focus on criminal justice for those who were killed during the massacres or during the protests killed by the state forces. So that was the main orientation of the RCs. That was the main compass they used to gauge and assess their positions: freedom, peace, and justice, and criminal justice for the murderers. Now, during the negotiations between the FFC and the military council, the Sudanese Communist Party has managed to get some support among the RCs, and also the general public, and that was due to its position of rejecting military rule, and in some incidents where it shared details of the negotiations with the public, while other FFC members were protecting the negotiations with a lot of secrecy from the people. However, as time passed, the positions that were taken by the Communist Party were designed basically to maintain its relationship with the coalition and still trying to be the party of the people, and that just does not work. So this compromised the position of the party and caused it to lose a lot of the public support that it was, because it was seen as a traitor, and even hated more than maybe other classical opposition parties that you expect them to do that. So over the years, there were different points of collaborations between the RCs and the Communist Party, but faith in the party was never again restored to where it was in the early days of the negotiations. Another important political actor is, of course, the transitional government itself, and regarding the relationship between the RCs and the transitional government, and with the state apparatus in general. As we mentioned, the RCs tasked themselves with the sensitive mission of both protecting the civilian half of the government as well as keeping an eye on the government with regards to the goals of the revolution. And this was a very difficult situation. The civilian half kept, appeasing their military partners, For example, creating legal structures that makes it easier for the military leader to escape responsibility for the massacres. And also on the other side, the transitional government was pushing for economic liberalization policies supported by international monetary organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, and like international diplomats from the global north and all of that. So it was those were the same policies that people started the protest against when it was al-Bashir's, So it's very clear that the transitional government is not committed to the demands of the revolution, whether in terms of like economic and social justice or in terms of criminal justice. But the RCs were seeing a very high risk that opposition to this government will open the way for the military takeover, and saw it as their mission to predict the transition. The transitional government tried to depoliticize the RCs, creating laws that turned them into some kind of an arm of the state, or tasked them with municipalities scopes of cleaning the streets, maintenance of schools, food distribution, and so on. The RCs took different stance regarding this, and it's important to understand that it makes sense given that they come from different economic and socioeconomic backgrounds. They will have different stance regarding their relationship to the state and how much they trusted the state and what's the state's impact in their life. So some of them decided to continue being resistance committees. Some of them decided to create separate bodies, call them service and change committees, and some of them decided to totally take on both things. And the impact of that was also further connecting the RCs to their communities, because they got to know way more about their demands, but while keeping their political lens, it managed to help them further detail their political project with regards to socioeconomic rights and services to people and all of that. There were also a lot of incidents of cooperation between the RCs and labor unions. RCs will arrange protests in support of labor demands. But it's important to note that labor organizing remained much weaker than the RCs organizing. There's a number of factors to that. Circa 2 years into the transitional period, the failure of the government was very clear. The impoverishment through neoliberal economic policies have reached crazy levels. We were at 60% inflation with al-Bashir. With the transitional government, we got to over 400% inflation. And the failure to achieve any significant improvement to people's lives, that's when the military council they thought that they can execute a coup in October 2021, thinking that the public's reject and anger at the transitional government will translate into support for the coup. But they were very wrong. There was a strong public rejection of the coup, and that was seen all over the country, because in the prior 2 years, the RCs kept planning and executing protests and marches in support of different issues. And on the morning of the coup, the public took the same routes that these marches took before, and it repeated the same chants. It's like they already had the tools in hand, and then the reason came and they utilized these tools. And by that time, the RCs have dropped the idea of supporting the FFC, because they totally lost the faith of the public, and the RCs themselves started using their coordination bodies to issue protest schedules. So they took on the role that the SPA, the Sudanese Professional Association, was taking in 2019, and they became to a far extent, an independent political actor. That's a long way from where they were in 2019 as a tactic of protest. And that was very successful. They managed to paralyze the coup for an entire year. It was not able to form a government. And the RCs at this time also decided that they must have their own detailed political project. So just in a few weeks after the coup, there were calls from different areas in the country for having their own charter. They will not work with the Freedom and Change Charter anymore. They have to have their own charter representing their political project. And we started getting proposals also of different political charters being proposed publicly on the social media pages of resistance committees in different areas. And the deliberation process started and went on for months. It was like a trial and error process, deliberations within cities on state level, sending proposals to different committees for some type of review, even seeking technical support from experts on certain issues, getting public input via social media, via like on the ground offline events. And you had more than 8,000 resistance committees from around Sudan participating in this process. And that's what created the Revolutionary People's Power Charter that included like parts on economic policy, development priorities, historical injustice, and the proposals for selecting the government from the bottom up. And the RCs at this moment were at their strongest point. After the coup, they were frequently approached by national elite and by international diplomats who understood that this is a real power within that this political actor called the RC have. And that this level of popular organizing structure, they cannot take power without getting the approval of the RCs and the support of the RCs, or by basically destroying them. So that was the strongest point of the RCs in the time after the coup.
I want to back up if we can. A couple of things. Yeah. The role of women in the process. How did that evolve and change? Because it was very clear, from just watching it with whatever mediums that at least I could during the time that during, at least in 2018, 2019 in particular, that the vast majority of people were women, and there was the iconic photo, and there was a lot of controversy in and around that, around the multi-ethnic nature of the symbolism, et cetera. But you made a clear point around saying that the RCs were, the organizing was primarily men, even though most of the participants were women. Did that pattern become kind of crystallized, or did it change or fluctuate over time?
Actually, this like there were a lot of observations at the time that were made by people about like the stark difference between the photos from the protests and the photos from the negotiation rooms. That the photos from the protests were mainly women of all ages and young men, while the photos from the negotiation rooms were mainly older men. And it is clear why women would join the protest in such huge numbers, because the women within every economic group, socioeconomic group, will be getting like the worst of the situation. So they were living the worst of it. And in fact, I do remember being told by women who were in the protest, many of them, not most of them, but many of them would sneak out of their houses to join the protests. They had a lot more to fear inside the house than they had from the protest, and many of them would say that there's nothing that the police, for example, would do to me that I am not facing the danger of having that done to me by acceptable structures of the society, whether it's allowed for my for my family to control my movement, or it's allowed for the police even to control how I dress. So that has happened to me. I'm ready to go out. So we saw that's how this, the majority of women happened. Women had less to fear because they were already going through the worst of it, and they had higher interest in changing the situation because they were going through the worst of it. Throughout the following months and years of the revolution, there was a piece of analysis that was lacking of why are women that being such a major factor. What's the impact of this on women? Like serious socioeconomic analysis of the situation of women and how are they impacted. And the transitional government capitalized on that by bringing empty liberal changes. So, for example, they made such a big deal out of passing a law that allows mothers to travel with their kids without approval from the written approval from the father. And like, okay, great, but again, like, what's the percentage of women who can actually travel? Who this is their main thing? Like, what why can't we put energy on that, and also energy in ensuring the labor rights of women farmers and miners who are getting like the worst of the situation in this country? So it was a lot of that, utilizing women, making such a big deal of having like 4 women ministers, while the actual issues of women remained deprioritized, and the situation of like the poorest of women remains getting worse, and they're getting the worst of what's in the situation. So this continued, this way of like trying to you know pass some liberal changes instead of actual impactful policies that economically impacts the situation and the life condition of women. But also we had a lot of work done by several women groups that worked on tying that, the question of women and the economic situations. So for example, they had the women marches that were done over 2 years, like twice in 2 years, and the women marches always made a very important point of bringing up and focusing on the economic rights, and always chanted that the demands are free healthcare and education, and for women to be safe. And that was the work done. How much success did that achieve? It's debatable, but at least it definitely brought like serious revolutionary feminist analysis to the discussion in a way that the transitional government tried very hard to end.
And more questions. And there's one question that came in earlier about perhaps citing an example of what happened with the tea vendors labor association as an example of how organized women were shut out and excluded and persecuted.
Yes, and it's very important. It's important to notice that the transitional government used the leading figures of the food and tea sellers union, which were mostly women, used them in its propaganda, used them and painting this image of the new pro-women government, but at the same time was not putting any effort into improving their living situation or their work situation. And that was seen with many other many other, whether it's like stuff related to women organizing or general labor organizing, that the transitional government had more interest in putting out propaganda than in actual change. Even when they pushed their own neoliberal economic policies at that time, they put more effort into the work of justifying this, into the work of creating cash handout programs that impacted a very small percentage, but was televised fully to justify desubsidization and increasing the cost of living to the people, but had very little interest in actually getting people to have their main needs at a reasonable price. So that was the situation regarding the priorities of the transitional government throughout different areas and throughout the years that it existed. And that was what brought the anger that made the military council think they can have their coup.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another piece I wanted to touch on before we move further was that 400% increase, right? That the inflation during the transitional government, during that period. How much of that do you think was a result of capital strikes to a degree, international kind of isolation, and how much of that was just bad policy on bad political direction on behalf of the transitional government and the neoliberal policies it was pursuing? Or was it some combination of both?
well, bad policy, but not bad as in wrong, but just bad as in evil. They were not wrong. They knew exactly, and the numbers were there to what kind of an impact such desubsidization and total floating of the currency will impact people. And that's why they came up with different, cash handout, their cash handout, program that they said that, well, we're going to give each individual, I think it was $5 a month per individual in each family for the people below poverty line. And we had already, like, the official numbers were 60% under the poverty line, so they wanted to give handouts to 60%, and it was clearly not doable even in numbers when you look at the amount of funds they managed to have for these initiatives. It did not cover not even a small part of the 50%, the 60%, even if we agree that this is the number, or not even for long enough. So it was not a mistake. The transitional government was fully aware of the impact of their economic policies, and that's why the FFC needed the military council on their side. So we know that during 2019, the FFC had two choices. There were two powers. There was a military council that is trying to push civilian protesters out, and civilian protesters trying to push the military rule out. It's clear that the FFC's project never aligned with the interest of the people, and that's why it made perfect sense for them to align themselves with the tools of violence of the state. Because once you put out such neoliberal economic policies, you will need violence to control the people. So none of that was a mistake. All of that was by design, and they thought that they have, if they get enough support from the military council and of international community, and international community did support them a lot. We did see all kinds of empty promises, and receiving the Prime Minister of Sudan for the first time in the EU and raising the flag of Sudan, and any empty gesture that the transitional government can use to put their propaganda out of why they are the government to be supported, and that people should, just live with the economic suffering of their policies, which are exactly the policies of al-Bashir's regime that people ousted a couple of years ago. We saw that kind of support. The international community itself was not up for supporting anymore. Like they did not really give them as much money as they said they would, but they give them the propaganda tools, and that eventually led to the transitional government falling apart. But it was not a mistake as in they didn't know it, but that's how neoliberal policies work. That's what they lead to.
And so why was there separate question, but related, a deeper question? Why was there so much daylight between the resistance committees and the transitional government and FSC? I mean, it's clear at some point, the way you broke it down, that they were working and coordinating together.
Yeah.
And then the resistance committees became their own independent force. But in becoming their own independent force, and being between the rock and the hard place, was it able, why weren't they able, I guess is the question, why weren't they able to apply more direct pressure on the transitional government to change and shift the economic policies at different points in time?
Okay, because propaganda. Because there was enough utilization of propaganda by the FFC and its allies to cement this idea that we should just keep our pressure on the transitional government to the minimum, so we do not cause an end of the transition and therefore a full takeover by the militaries. So that was the idea, that you need to protect the transitional government. The transitional government represented the revolution. So accordingly, the resistance committees had always had to balance. Like the first protest, like major protest by the resistance committees, like across the country against the transitional government, or during the transitional government time, was under the slogan of supporting the transitional government and rejecting the stray from the path of the revolution. It's like it was very important to show that we still support the transitional government. So this like our slogans are not being used by the military side to justify a full takeover. That people are rejecting this government, we're going to take over the full power. So this was there, and the resistance committees learned. Like I remember that the following year, on the anniversary of that protest, the next one was just in support of the demands of the revolution. Like there was no supporting of the transitional government anymore. Why did this take so long? Because so resistance committees are, we said, they are neighborhood, like geographic based structures that are, a coalition that is around resistance of a political project. And that, as strong as it is, in terms of organizing protests across the country and coordinating and all of that, it still cannot do what a revolutionary political organization with a clear ideology should and can do. They cannot replace the Revolutionary Party, because the Revolutionary Party is the place where those lessons are accumulated, right? And those and where there's a clear ideology upon which we can assess options and put out it's not explanations, but put out a clear point of view to the public as well. So a lack of a political party meant more trial and error than strategic strategic path that is based on clear analysis, based on a clear ideology. So both those things kind of led to that delay.
Well, this leads us to the to the third question, right? Like, so at the onset of the Civil War, how did the resistance committees respond?
Okay, so this war, like the RSF and the SAF war, the RSF being the Rapid Support Forces, a governmental militia, and the SAF, which is the official army, and in April 2023, this war started between the SAF and the RSF, which were both previously members of the military council, and they both have achieved like more power with every violent action that they took, like from massacres to coups and so on. So it just made perfect sense that they both will attempt a total control of power by unleashing like the total violence, which is war. And when this war broke, starting with the capital, there were also new forms of grassroots organizing that appeared. So we must look at both the response of the RCs and the response of those new bodies that were formed. And those were the new bodies were known as the emergency groups, ERs. The ERs started being formed in like the first hours of the war. There were community organizations that they took on the task of like operating health facilities, whether they were like existing ones or makeshift ones, like in the middle of the neighborhood. And as the war continued, they took on new tasks such as evacuations or arranging maintenance of like water and electricity infrastructure, mostly destroyed by the war, or like starting community kitchens. And because it also became really difficult for people to secure food, and community kitchens became very important. And all of these were tasks that that both warring parties totally abandoned, even in the areas where they had fully controlled. And at the same time, international aid organizations were such a failure. They as one would expect, with all their budgets of millions of dollars, they could not do what the ERs were doing, basically with small donations that are mostly coming from Sudanese diaspora. And the ERs are still, up until today, the main support for a lot of Sudanese people inside and outside the conflict areas. And they give a great example of like communal management of resources and of services. It's much more successful than anything that we saw from like governments or international aid at the time of war or peace. So these are organizations that are very important to pay attention to, because not just for their like the value of the lessons we get from them, but also because like if they fail, we will leave millions of Sudanese people with zero support on social services. Like that are necessary for them to stay alive. Those ERs were mostly formed in the same shape of the RCs. They used the same methods of communications. They included many of the individuals that were in the RCs, but they are not like a direct evolution of the RCs. It's not like the RCs changed themselves into ERs in any ways. The RCs are still existing, like in their own, as their own entities for most of them. And in most of the RCs, when the war started, they continued the work that they do. They put out statements that were calling basically like for the end of the war. They said that this is a war against the people, and against the revolution, and that neither side shared the interests of the people that the RCs fought for. But as time passed, we started seeing the RCs taking like a mixed position that combined like rejecting the war in general, but also at the same time like expressing their support for the state and the national army, and like kind of taking a different position from about the crimes done by the RSF or the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces. In my opinion, that was due to assessing like the impact of both warring parties, not on the people, because like they both did the same crimes at the people, but they impacted on this thing called the state. And in this idea, the army is like the official army of the state, and we are the patriots with the army, while the RSF is a rebellion against the state. And that's a narrative that is pushed by SAF, by the Sudanese Armed Forces, and by their supporters. It's a narrative that is usually pushed like by the elites, like for decades around the world. The public should, protect the state and the national, it's national tools and all of that. This concept of patriotism, and those concepts kind of confuse the understanding of the masses regarding their interest and make them, fight for the survival of existence systems of oppression that is basically making their lives worse. In Sudan, this propaganda is as old as the state and the army itself. So it's not a surprise that this propaganda won over the propaganda of the RSF. It was rather easy for the army to find support, among the public, and even get support in the RCs, and even get members of the RCs to join the new militias by the army, with this idea that they will fight for the state, for securing the state now, and then later on, once we're back to the same old situation, now we go back to fighting the Sudanese armed forces and the military rule that we help protect and support. So it's just a very unclear situation that is very similar to the position that was taken by the RSF previously regarding the FFC, that we're going to protect this failed, partnership, this counter-revolutionary partnership, but at the same time try to like push it to do things that are more towards the goals of the revolution. As I said, that's what we get out of not having a revolutionary party. That's how we get stuck in trial and errors instead of accumulating lessons and moving towards just moving further in advancing the revolutionary project. Because right now the RCs have lost the public narrative, and the army is definitely again winning the public narrative and people's support for military rule, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Dare I say, in this medium, and you can skip it if need be, is there any prospect of that revolutionary party forming on the heels of this experience?
Are there attempts? Yes. Have there always been attempts? Yes. And that's as far as I know, brother. That's
Understood.
yeah, it's like that. The number of ones that I've personally been involved in. Like I stopped counting, let alone like the many others that I haven't even got access to know about, and many comrades all around who are supposed like are working on that. But we have like there's nothing else but to work on it. You know, work on it as we are clarifying the project, work on it as we are trying to put out alternatives that make people's lives a bit better and advances towards you know, the revolutionary project or achieving the goals of the revolution, and just work on it.
Well, before we go to more open questions in the last kind of 30 minutes, I do want to just ask your opinion, because I really just myself deeply interested. Like, where is this war going? You know, because unfortunately, just from the outside, I just
Yeah.
I don't see or hear it as much as I can track it. You know what I mean? I just don't see how this is going to end at this particular point in time. And at some point it has to end.
Yeah.
But, you know, largest displacement on the planet now, you know, and that seems to be growing and deepening every day. You know, and with all the different kind of outside parties, with all of the focus, you know, at least internationally for the most part, being kind of concentrated around either Palestine or Ukraine. You know, what I'm just at a loss to just seeing how this may conclude or play out.
Hmm. Hmm. No, it makes perfect sense that one does not see a way out right now, because in reality, all parties that have the power to change the situation have no interest in ending it. Like the you know, we've been saying that SAF, for example, has been getting more popular support. You know, its propaganda is working again after, you know, just before the war, people in this were in the streets protesting military rule, coming up with chants against all the military leaders in the streets. The same military leaders right now are like idealized. They are gods. So the military is winning, regardless of what's happening to the people. The RSF is getting control over land, and you know, in a crazy speed. They keep going from one city to the other, and control over resources, and increasing the size of their militia by adding, you know, more people in every area they pass through. So those have no interest in changing it. Regional allies are getting all their interests from Sudan already. I mean, and the UAE was just, you know, there was a report that the UAE is, I think, the first or second largest exporter of gold. The UAE has no gold mines. Those are Sudanese like gold mines that are making that. So the UAE, the Saudi is getting all the you know, the whatever kind of crops or animal resources that they need from Sudan, and getting all the land that they need from Sudan. So no one that has a weight in this process right now has an interest in ending the war. So this has to change. That's the only way out. That we need to bring in the people who have an interest in ending the war, and we need to make this war um, the less favorable situation for those parties. And I don't think there is no way out. I think we are already doing bits and pieces of what will form the way out, but we need to do that in a more organized manner. Just like so we're doing the ERs, for example. The ERs is the only thing and main thing that is now sustaining people's lives. But the ERs, in the name, they are emergency rooms. You know, with this idea that this is just like a short-term temporary situation that's going to end soon. The war is going to end in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, like the military leaders were saying, the SAF leaders were saying. But we need to know that that is not true. And we need to create a more sustainable model, one that is not dependent on donations and volunteers. You know, increase the human resources available by, instead of this volunteer model, have a model that brings together all the residents of the area to make the decisions regarding the use of services and the use of the resources that they have, form a neighborhood council that of all the members, not representatives of them, form workplace council, think about more sustainable financing model instead of donations that can stop at any time, because this is important to sustain the lives of the people in Sudan, but this is also like the main building blocks of creating the new, like the actual people's power from the bottom, right? That you create actual at the bottom, you create actual structures where people utilize people's power, where people actually make decisions about the services and resources that they have. It is not totally, like, it's very reasonable. Remembering how after the march in 2019 that was arranged by the RCs following the massacre and the internet shutdown, when the international and the regional powers and the FFC and the military council saw how this new like RCs, resistance committees, are organizing and capable of making their own political decisions, they jumped into negotiations because they had to stop this revolutionary, movement that is coming to them. So imagine, instead of organizing like one protest across the country and as big as it was, but once they see that there's a new structure that is being formed for a new way of managing resources in the country, it only makes perfect sense to expect that them and their international regional allies will push for like the return of the dictatorship and control instead of the war that created enough of a mess for those new bodies to start forming themselves, a return to the old system, and an end of the war. If that happens, okay, good. It's always good to end the war, but also they find the people more organized to against their dictatorship. If that does not happen and the war continues, the people are more organized to keep themselves alive, and at the same time start building a new system of people power that makes it not possible to force an authority over the people, because like people are controlling their decision making, coordinating amongst themselves. There is no other way. And I have to say that like the idea of neighborhood councils and workplace councils that includes, and basically a neighborhood council is the labor union of a residence that includes everybody that is within the area, homeless, with a home, young, old, everybody from a certain age is a part of this council. And this is something that was called for by many people during the transitional period, during the coup. And it was often said that, yeah, but we need a faster solution for now. And it just seems that like the faster solutions have again and again took us to a worse situation. So maybe the faster solutions are not the answer, but actual organizing is the answer. And of course, as we said, we cannot substitute the revolutionary party, the revolutionary political organization that is very important in the process of pushing and advancing this organizing. So like actual community organizing, a new system from below, as well as the revolutionary party working together. That's the only and the fastest way that I can imagine to end the war and end the situations and the root causes, of poverty and underdevelopment and all of that caused the war. Yeah, we need to do that. That's it. We need to get out of the emergency mindset and into actual organizing and radical change.
Well, I have a lot more questions, but we got like 20 more minutes. So I'm gonna open it up for those who are participating with us today. And folks can just, if you can, type your questions into the chat feature, and we'll take them, kind of one by one. I hope, and this is being recorded. It will be shared out for those who couldn't join us. But I do hope that folks, take heed to the many lessons that you are sharing, because there's many that I can think of in a deeper interrogation of this, the issue that we've been having about, how to organize, the revolutionary subjective force. Like that's a critical one that not just the Sudan is facing, but it's a global question now, and there's a lot of lessons here that I think we need to look at and learn. Here's one, Muzan, that came up. There's a couple of them that are coming up now. One from Jordan. Was there a sense for the people that the state would be able to create or return some sense of safety, whereas the resistance communities didn't have a coherent vision on how to do that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the switch that happened after the war. While the before the war, the resistance committees seemed to have a clearer political project. Post the war, it was because the resistance committees tried to balance like these opposing positions of protecting the state and protecting the people. So they are against the war, but they are still with the army. This made their political project incoherent. They could not, like, it was not possible to organize behind something that is that confused. While the army had a very clear narrative. They win, they end the rebellion, they control this country, and never again will we have the kind of mess that the revolution brought. So yes, that's exactly why I say that the RCs, the resistance committees, are losing the war of narrative, and the SAF, the Sudanese armed forces, are winning it.
There's a question from also from Jordan. Since foreign powers like Saudi Arabia want Sudan's resources, is there a way that the workers in mining and agriculture could organize and strike, or is the repression too extreme?
No, well, it depends on the time, right? Like right now, the situation in different areas in Sudan is different. We've had before, like the strike in May in 2019. It included mining areas. It included like oil fields. It included many like foreign investment projects, agriculture, and others. And after the transitional government started, one of the first like encampments that took place after that were encampments around Saudi investments, agricultural investments. The local community were demanding a return of their land, and better regulations regarding the use of water, because the agricultural project, the foreign investment was basically draining the area. So this was this happened, and it's the transitional government, of course, did not stand with that. But anyway, right now the situation is different from in every area in Sudan. You can imagine that you have the RSF controlling and like officially half of the country, and the other half kind of by the SAF, but maybe even less. But a lot of these areas are like not even there isn't even a clear presence of either SAF or RSF. So there's different levels of security threats, but there are also a lot of openings with the failure of the capital in a country that with a design that is as centralized as Sudan. The failure of the capital opened a lot of areas for the different states to govern themselves without the control of the federal government. And we even saw some collaborations between ERs in certain states with the state government to provide for the displaced or other issues. We saw other ERs in other states that were attacked, and their members were put to jail. So it's very different from one area to the other. But the first step that we need to take for us to be able to know if there are possibilities of strikes or any other mass action is organizing.
There's a question for the Revolutionary Party. You envision what resources would they need to effectively spread the message and empower the people? What would be their relationship with the emergency committees?
I think the main resource of the Revolutionary Party is its ideology and clear, having clear, political stances and being able to elaborate them to the public and being um, involved in creating alternative solutions to the ones that are pushed by the SAF or the RSF or any other authoritarian force. That's the main, like the ideology, the organization, the commitment, and the honesty with the public are the main resources of the Revolutionary Party, and organization includes the different members of the party. And I do not envision an organizational links with the ERs, but it is reasonable to imagine that such a party will have great interest in sustaining the ERs, in turning them into sustainable structures, because the Revolutionary Party is a people-centered or a people-first party and sees the impacts of these ERs and knows that losing them, people will lose the main support for their, to stay alive under this war. So it will be an issue that this party will theorize around, call for different alternatives, methods to turn it into a sustainable structure, call for people to join, and basically make it a main topic of the party work, which is the intellectual work of accumulating lessons and coming up with alternatives and advocating them among the public.
Yeah, keep the questions coming, you guys. Some good ones in here. Quincy asks, what can we learn from Sudan's RCs and apply for our own organizing here in the U.S.? That's a deep question into itself. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are major lessons that we all learn. There are lessons from the successes and there are lessons from the failure. The lesson from the success, the main lesson from the success, I think, is that we need to all remember that, and I say that a lot, that like the 150 the smartest like intellectuals and organizers with the strongest commitment to our revolutionary project could not have came together in 2018 and imagined how the RCs will turn from like a protest tactic into the independent political actor that it is. That a lot of the revolutionary path is clarified by doing the work itself. We have to do the work as we theorize around it, and not, it's fine if we know the final goal. We knew the final goal was achieving the goals of the revolution, and we saw a few steps, a couple of steps, in the near future, and that is fine. We do not need to see like the full path until to achieving the goals of the revolution before we start it. We need to start doing the work, and that's what clarifies the work. Some like not some stuff, most stuff in terms of organizing and in terms of impacting actual political change cannot be theorized in a vacuum. They need to be practiced, and they need to always take into consideration the different circumstances that change. So it's more about having the revolutionary compass, but also having a structure that is capable of learning lessons, of debating them, of criticizing, and of coming up with new ideas to fix the flaws of the previous attempt. That's what the RCs were successful with. They just kept working. They kept working, and they figured it out as they went on. And as they went on, their ability to plan for a longer term increased. So from coming up with demands for a protest to coming up with a political charter and a political project detail, that's a long way. So that's how it happens. I think that's the main lesson from the success of the RCs, and the main lesson maybe from the failures of the RCs and of the failures of the Sudanese revolution in general is that it makes no sense to expect a group or political entities that benefit from an existing structure to lead a revolution against it. A revolution against the existing structure will not be led by those who benefit from it. That is something that we wasted a lot of time going, being behind the FFC and trying to protect the FFC, and now being behind the Sudanese armed forces and trying to protect the Sudanese armed forces, and not seeing that those are structures that exist because of the systems of oppression. So we cannot expect them to be our leadership or to be our partners. We cannot expect them to be anything but our enemies in the path towards achieving the revolutionary goals.
Couple of more before we close on out. One coming from Lee. Are comparative or regional perspectives or encouragement from your experiences on the tribalist Gen Z protests in Kenya against neoliberal tax regimes and wider neo-colonial rule? I would also add that there's also some things I saw about some protests in Uganda now beginning to emerge, and so just to put that in the mix. But the continent is on fire these days, which is a good thing.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think this is rather general, but because we saw that in Sudan, and I get very stressed when I see it in other places, because it is a risky trap, which is the trap of confusing an age bracket for a revolutionary actor. Thinking that it's the revolution of the youth or the revolution of Gen Z. This is very risky, and this is something that, like, we saw in Sudan, how Western think tanks love to push it. This whole revolution of the youth, having youth speakers speak about how the youth fails, and there are youth among the oppressors. They are not born old. That's not how it works, right? Like, there are youth on both sides, and there are all people who are oppressed as well, and who are our revolutionary allies. I hope that the rest of the continent does not make the mistakes that we made, whether at the beginning when they tried to make it a women's revolution, and then turn it into like the liberal values of number of women in high places, or in as ministers, and so on, or even when they tried to turn it into an issue of like the revolution of the youth. But in both cases, in reality, it was just a revolution of the impoverished. It's just a revolution of the oppressed, and the oppressed come in all age brackets. I think that's the main thing that really stresses me out when I see like the news around what's happening in the rest of the continent. I hope we all escape this trap. The think tanks love it. Think tanks love it. That's what makes it so easy to distribute it as propaganda. They will shower you with calls for talks where you talk about your experience as a young person, in the experience of the youth, and it's very risky. It's very risky. We need to be very clear in our economic analysis to make sure that they do not turn it into like an identity thing. People being identified as young, and what happens when they get old? Like, do they become the enemy now? It just makes no sense,
Yeah, thank you for that. But if I can add the one element that I think outside of the youth that is surprising, I've been following and keeping track. I know some of the folks from the Kenyan Communist Party and WAMCO and some other forces, there who've been at the heart of some of the protests, and they were calling for a big one today, and it looked like Ruto basically in the regime basically chose, the stick in terms of their response, and it seems to be probably what they're going to do from here on out. But the real quality of these protests the last 2 months that has really struck me is that it is kind of tribeless or ethnicless in many respects, and that I think points more to what you're saying. Like, it causes us, I think, to look at the actual class character of the politics in a different way than what's being put out in the general narrative. And that we need to really, I think, both interrogate, but also to find some particular ways, to be in solidarity with, because I think that points to a critical transformation of politics that we hope, sweeps the continent, because there's a lot of interesting things, a lot of questionable things, like the new Sahelian Federation,
Yeah.
I'm a bit skeptical, but I'm paying attention, just the military regime piece is a deep skepticism for me.
Yeah.
Fidel's or Sankara's in the world at any point in time, even those have some issues, but let's keep going, let's keep a watch, and see how these connect with what's going
Yeah.
on in Kenya, what's going on, in Senegal, where a left force was just recently elected, so definitely some things to watch. But the last question, Amazon, could you speak on the Darfurian experience as a start of the war? Are they
Mhm.
involved in the resistance community or mobilization? Are their voices being prioritized?
Yeah, so we had RCs in Darfur just like we had RCs in different areas in Sudan. Right now we are also having emergency rooms in Darfur, just like we have in different places in Sudan. And the emergency rooms in Darfur are some of, it seems, some of the most organized, also for different factors. It's important to remember that for the population in Darfur, the war did not start today, because they've been suffering, the attacks of the RSF since the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, when they were not even the RSF, they were at the Janjaweed at the time. And I think one of the most the worst impacts of the war is that, given that the RSF came like ethnically mostly at the beginning from the areas in Darfur, there's also they are now suffering again as the they're always seen as suspects by the SAF, and they're getting, even in the areas outside Darfur residents are getting more of the violence of SAF as being expected to be, spies for the RSF and so on. So the Darfuri population is getting the worst of it in different aspects. Actually, some of the things that were very clear is that we had a network shutdown in Darfur for months. And it was only when the network shutdown reached Khartoum and the eastern areas where SAF control continued that we started seeing, campaigns of return network to Sudan, and especially that the shutdown in Darfur was done by SAF, while the shutdown in the rest of the country was done by the RSF. And that's what I said earlier about the crimes of each side being treated differently. The Darfuris are seeing the worst of the situation. That is definitely a fact right now, but we are seeing better organizing in Darfur, maybe also having a longer history of having to handle their own social services and needs, since the centralized federal government rarely cared, also gave them an advantage in being more organized right now in terms of their ERs and RCs.
Well, a lot more questions, but we're going to end this. Always try to be disciplined with the hour and a half, out of respect to everybody who participates and speaks. But Muzan, definitely thank you for your time. Definitely
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing, the richness of experience. Um, if you can, if there's anything in English that you would recommend, that our audience, kind of read or sources to follow up, that would be greatly appreciated, just so folks can kind of stay tuned and figure out how to plug in.
Well, as I was preparing for this, I thought about something, and maybe this is not very recent and not tied to this war, but maybe tied more to the climate change aspect of what's happening in Sudan. A paper that I find very interesting, that actually does not just focus on climate change, but focuses on the political utilization of climate change issues in explaining the conflict in Sudan, and also basically depoliticizing the conflict and making it an issue just about droughts and farmers and pastoralists fighting, while there is like political issues and issues of land grabs and all of that is happening. I think it's very important, while we take into consideration the climate issues, that we make sure that we are again taking them not in a way that is depoliticized or away from the economic factors, because then they can also be used for propaganda as easily as anything else. And the name of the paper, it's called Power, Contested Institutions and Land, Repoliticizing Analysis of Natural Resources and Conflict in Darfur. It was out in 2017 by Brendan Bromwich. I hope I got the name right, but I think it's an important paper on the question of Sudan and climate intersections.
I will download it and make it available somehow, some way to everybody here, and I'll just put it up and out when we broadcast this particular video and get it circulating out there. So again, Muzan, thank you. Very much appreciative, and thank all of from participating. We'll be back on Thursday with part 3 in this series with Nisreen El Amin, to talk about more of the kind of the international characters, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and their kind of interest in keeping the civil war going. So that'll be on Thursday at 4 p.m. East Coast time. I hope everybody could join us, and we'll be doing part 4 in early August, and that's going to be with some comrades who are kind of describing the situation in the Abyei region and some of the efforts that have been taking place there. So be on the lookout, and then we'll probably be encouraged to do 6 of these, if not more. So we'll keep it going in August and into September, and just try to share what we can and play our part in amplifying the organizing work which is going on. So I want to thank you all on behalf of the ISE. And this is Kali signing out. Thank you.